Yo, yo, yo. All right, so Minimal wins the last game, takes the final, or not the final set, but the next set against WebBowser. WebBowser starts off earlier in the tournament, knocking Minimal down to loser's bracket. Minimal fights his way back into the grand finals, takes the set against WebBowser, which resets the bracket, which means both of the two fighters are going to play a full set of 5 matches, or a best of 5, I should say. And this is a conquest format, so I just want to kind of roughly go through their teams again and maybe talk about the format in general and just kind of a maybe overall strategy. Um, what I think each player needs to do in order to take this set. As we saw in the last couple matches, WebBowser's Jane team seems to have a lot of issues with digital attacks. And when I say with digital attacks, I mean using digital attacks. Um, the only two on the team are on Jane's hand cannon and Pema's firewall. Both very quite slow fighters, have a very exploitable weakness. Um, Especially Jane, emotional attacks, very big in the format, very big on a lot of Minimal's teams. That being Zale and Grace. On this team, Grace and Lise. And this team, almost half the fighters, Honora, Clint, Grace, all very powerful against Jane. I think what WebBowser needs to do in order to take this final set, um, first of all, obviously he needs to win a game with the Jane team, and we saw in the last couple matches that he really had trouble against teams um, that had a Grace on them, but also couldn't make good use of Pema when there was a Jane sitting in the back, always there to wall. Jane having naturally super high physical defense and fairly high digital defense as well, which are Pema's only attacking types. So really, I took a little bit of time looking at all the players' teams, and I guess if I were in WebBowser's position, what I would want to do is get this Jane team up against Minimal's Honora team, mostly because it's the only one without a Jane. Um, this Sayla team has a Jane, this Eric team has a Jane, so the best opportunity to make use of this Pema fighter on WebBowser's side is to use it against a team that doesn't have Jane in the back to wall. So, but that doesn't mean it's easy by any means. WebBowser really needs to put himself in a position where he's got Pema behind a decoy from that Jane captain. So what he needs to do is stay ahead on battery, get that decoy on Pema, because not really much on this team likes switching into Pema. Yeah, Clint has decently high physical defense. Yeah, so does Grace. And all these fighters outspeed Pema, which is why that decoy is so important. But none of them like switching in on a Good Muscles Haymaker. Good Muscles increasing the strength of physical attacks. So even if Grace, with her plus 10 physical defense, switches in on a Haymaker, I mean, she's still taking huge amounts of damage. You can only really do that once. So that's really, I think, what WebBuzzer needs to do is somehow get this Jane team up against the Nora captain on Minimal's side, and really focus on putting himself in a position where Pema has a chance to parry successfully, get that decoy, and then kind of take out that Grace, that Clint, and just kind of wreak havoc and let Wendell or someone else kind of clean up after that. Still, it's definitely, I would say, an uphill battle. I mean, like Yasmin has quick foil against Wendell. Grace can unbutton, raising her initiative high enough to outspeed Wendell. So Wendell's, it's gonna be tricky to kind of clean up with him, but I think that's probably the best way to go. This Jane team against the other two, as we saw, just really struggled against Grace in general, and not being able to chip her down enough, mostly because it was hard to get Pema in without Jane being there just to switch in and indefinitely and wall. On minimal side, I'd say, I mean, obviously last set we saw him take a game with all of these teams, so we know it's possible. We also know it's possible for WebBowser to win because he already knocked minimal out previously in the tournament. So really, it's anyone's match. But if I had to say, it's a little bit favored towards minimal, just because there's he's got Grace on all of these teams, and minimal's Jane team doesn't have a good way of getting rid of Grace outside of having that decoy up. So I think that's going to be the key to this set. Minimal just needs to stay ahead on battery, make sure when he's up against this Jane team not to ever let WebBowser get that decoy up. WebBowser's kind of proven the strength of this Eric team and the Grace team especially. The Grace team very well rounded, very offensive, but also having some defensive pressure with lunge invite on 2 fighters, able to kind of whittle down pretty much anything. So I'm excited to see how this goes. I think it's either one's game. We've kind of seen the strength of both players, able to use their teams effectively. So I really look forward to this set. So let's hop into the game, see how it goes. All right. Game 1 of this set. We got WebBowser choosing to lead off with his Jane team against Minimal's Sayla team. All right. As I mentioned before, WebBowser needs to get a win with this Jane team in order to set himself up for a good position. Going to be tough. He's got that opposing Jane. Minimal considering just kind of leading off with Grace, realizing that Grace is a big threat against WebBowser's team. I think what WebBowser needs to do is try his hardest to get ahead on the battery in order to get that successful parry off. Minimal has a lot of options against this team as a lead. I see Eric against WebBowser's Wendell. Eric always a good lead with flashy, with fireworks. Get ahead on the battery gain. WebBowser switches in Jane. Tanks the hit. He starts healing up with Lucky Pendant. It's looking very familiar. But look at that, Minimal already almost a full battery. Just one attack. So Minimal free to switch out into Zale. WebBowser hitting with that bypass clause. Doing a big chunk against Zale's fairly weak physical defense. But now Minimal's free to go for a peck here, and not much like switching into it. WebBowser chooses to go with Cherry. Eats that pretty effectively. But down 8 stages from Vivid. Is not going to be able to survive another peck. WebBowser, I believe from a previous game, we know the Fashion Advice does get the knockout here. Minimal hopefully remembers that, because Cherry definitely outspeeds Zale here. Minimal might just choose to sack Zale, get that extra bit of battery. Kind of feels like he's done his job. WebBowser scouting with decoy. Eats that second peck from Zale. I'm not sure what to do here. WebBowser kind of in a good position. Free to Fashion Vice, free to decoy here. Could even go for a pop-ups, though that's a little bit more risky knowing that a single peck would take down Cherry. WebBowser goes for that Fashion Vice and secures the KO on Minimal Zale. So WebBowser taking first blood here, but definitely behind on the battery game. And we're free to bring in pretty much anything here. We know the proxy Cherry means Sayla is a threat. Minimal choosing to go with bypass clause here. It seems like. And a parry. Okay, bypass clause into Jane. It's pretty much 0. Minimal using a parry there. Not quite sure what the parry was for. Maybe just wanting to preserve the health on Eric. But now I guess WebBowser kind of has tempo. Eric doesn't really do too much against Jane other than charge his battery. Kind of scared of bypass clause here. Grace is a good switch into bypass clause, but not a good switch into hand cannon. Which is what it seems like Minimal chooses to do. Let's see what WebBowser goes for. Takes that biting damage and goes for pop-ups. Okay, so that's definitely going to put some switching pressure onto Minimal, but Minimal's now in the good position, is free to go for unbutton here. Not much WebBowser can do about it. It's kind of forced to switch out into something like Kaiban. Kaiban in. Eats that unbutton pretty handily, but Minimal gets that initiative boost here. Free to use another unbutton. Free to ribbon twirl, perhaps. Could also consider switching to a digital attacker like Eric. WebBowser most likely looking to get some charge here with that charge panel. Tidy isn't going to do much, and Admire this early in the game kind of it's a little bit too much tempo loss there. So it does go for that charge panel. Gets that battery. WebBowser's free here to. He could go for the parry. Chooses not to. Instead tanks the hit. Goes for the Admire. Maybe trying to set up something like a parry next turn. Triggers the fleeting locket on Minimal's Grace. Minimal now gets the switch into Eric, who is then free to do something like a flourish fireworks. Minimal takes the damage from pop-ups there. Gloam Locket no longer active on Minimal's Eric unless he's able to heal up, but he's free to go for a Flourish Disruption Wave here. Flourish Disruption Wave is not a critical hit, which means WebBowser could parry there, but not wanting to risk a Flourish Fireworks, decides to switch in his Jane. Pop-ups are gone on Minimal's side. He heals up from the Captain Plan, activates Gloam Locket again. That was a great turn for Minimal. Being able to force out Kaiban there with the fireworks, potentially. And he was able to safely get that disruption wave off and heal. Isn't in a great spot here against Jane, but Jane is starting to get a little bit lower on health. Minimal recognizing that he can eat an attack here, even a bypass clause. Considering that WebBowser might try and predict a switch. WebBowser does no such thing, goes for the bypass clause and knocks Minimal down to Gloam Locket range. Minimal with the full battery could do something like Flourish bypass clause here for the full heal. Pretty safe against even a potential parry on WebBowser's side, because bypass clause goes through parry. I think Minimal definitely wants to flourish here, or at least be able to flourish later to heal Eric back up. Goes for that regular fireworks for that battery charge before going down to a flourish bypass clause. WebBowser flourishing that attack, goes back up super high on health. Is free to live another day and wall Sayla later on, though that allows Grace to switch in, get that 10 chip from biting, and threaten with another unbutton. Kaiban cannot switch into this, especially after that Admire boost. Kaiban switches in, WebBowser just sacking him for the charge and for the free switch in. Not sure what WebBowser is going to bring in here though. Not sure what WebBowser's going to bring in here. Not sure if Pema can take a hit from boosted Grace at this range. Button might do a little bit too much, but let's find out. A Flourish on Button does 172. Looks like WebBowser has a single investment point in emotional defense. That's not going to save Pema here. Doesn't quite have the battery to parry here either. Even a Flourish, even a Flicker Glove from Pema, I'm not sure that gets the KO on Grace, though might have been worth it for the extra damage, because Minimal heals back up to full, and there's not much WebBowser can do from here. Has a potential parry available now, though Minimal's still with an extra battery and outspeeding. It's going to make it difficult for Wendell to do much in this position. Still has Gloam Locket, so can get a free hit. Maybe has an opportunity here, WebBowser does, to bait out a Flourish. But I'd say Minimal is definitely in the commanding position from here. That Grace threatening with Riding Crop and Unbutton. Minimal not flourishing. WebBowser, Gloam Locket activates, goes for that snub. I do like that snub play there. Drops the boosts on Grace, though I think it might be a little too late here. Wendell always a good opponent to Jane. Always having emotional attacks. Jane having almost zero emotional defense. Though a parry bypass clause here from Minimal would put WebBowser in an awkward position. WebBowser's Jane, a good defensive switch here, and chooses to go with that. Minimal gonna go for that bypass clause. Does 9 to WebBowser's Jane, who heals 7 back up with Lucky Pendant. Both fighters having a full battery. Though Minimal having a little bit more staying power with that Sailor Captain still in the back. I think WebBowser's only chance to win this game is to somehow get that decoy. It's gonna be tough though. That Grace in the back is looking scary, outspeeding. Actually, not outspeeding anything because of the SAD, but still threatening in the back for sure. Doesn't go down to anything in one hit. Kind of a stall war here. Minimal allowing WebBowser to get some more charge. WebBowser allowing Minimal to get some more charge. Going for that pop-ups, realizing there's no more Eric to dissuade those away. This game looking pretty familiar. And we're not sure what to choose, hand cannon or bypass clause here. WebBowser going for the hand cannon once more. And we'll maybe anticipating a switch there, going for the bypass clause. So here's what I mean, that Flourish hand cannon. Minimal's going to get that digital attack boost, also going to heal back up to pretty much full with that Sailor Captain plan. And the best WebBowser can do is something like a Flourish bypass clause for that 50 HP heal. WebBowser considering what to do. Minimal uses that attack, Heals up to full, gets that boost. WebBowser just chipping away, slowly building up that battery. Hand cannon not quite enough to get that KO on Jane here. But 39, that's going to be hard to come back from. Ooh, WebBowser goes for that bypass clause into the thorn pendant Jane, securing himself, or kind of turning himself into fodder right there. So WebBowser no longer has access to that captain plan, with the captain being down. Wendell can come in now, but with Grace being that high HP, it's going to be difficult for WebBowser to come back from here, even with those 2 full batteries. WebBowser going for that fashion advice. That will get the knockout on Jane. So WebBowser survives another couple turns. Oh, but Flicker Glove on Minimal Sayla. 2 Flourish Flicker Gloves. Nothing WebBowser can do about that right now. Because WebBowser has that proxy, the other ability for Cherry being Haughty, which kind of negates any priority moves used against her. But in this case, Flourish Flicker Glove, you can't parry a critical hit, which Flourish Flicker Glove is. So Sayla going back up to full. Or I should say taking that Fury Pendant chip. But if another Flourish Flicker Glove, WebBowser just didn't have an answer to that after losing Jane. Man. Alright, Minimal gets the win with his Sayla team. Good game.